Breaking news for your home. Wayday. Wayfair's big sale is almost here, and you can score the best deals in home. Like up to 80% off everything home. Yes, you heard that right. 80% off with free shipping on everything. Plus surprise flash deals all Wayday long. We're talking outdoor furniture and essentials, rugs, and more. All at Wayfair, and all up to 80% off during Wayday. Shop Wayfair's Wayday from April 25th through 27th.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
They're often not asking for help. And it's the ones who don't ask for help who you should pay attention to. If you're looking for somebody who you think may need or would benefit from your support, whatever that might look like, look around and find the person who's invisible in the room. The person who's invisible in the room is probably the person who would benefit from a conversation with you. Not the loud person, not the talkative person.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom.
Hi, I'm Bill Raman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 359. You know, there are moments when you come across an idea that feels simple at first, almost obvious, and yet, the more you sit with it, the more it starts to shift into something deeper inside you. And maybe as you listen today, you might begin to notice where that's already happening for you. This conversation is certainly one of those opportunities. Today we're diving in to a conversation that lives at the intersection of systems, people, and what really creates change. Now, you might already have your own thoughts about systems, about how they work and how they don't, about where they help and where they fall short. You might even begin to wonder, as we explore this together, where in your own life or your own leadership you see the difference between something that works on paper and something that works in reality. Because today's guest brings a perspective that doesn't come from theory alone. It comes from a very lived experience, being inside the system and stepping beyond it. Erik Marks is a lawyer, professor, and author of Rescuing Ethan and Gabe, The Power of One Stable Political Relationship. And what marks Erik's work and what makes him so compelling is not just what he sees, what he thinks. In this episode, we explore a powerful idea, one that might challenge the way you think about leadership and change itself. That systems can change lives. Not all at once and not perfectly, but slowly, and often at a cost most people aren't prepared for and aren't prepared to pay. So as you listen, you might begin to reflect on your own role in the systems that you're a part of, the people you've impacted, and maybe even the moments where you had a choice to stay or step away. And without needing to force anything, just notice what comes up for you, because sometimes the smallest idea is the one that stays with you the longest. Let's dive in. Mark Hecht, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And Mark Hecht, you wrote a book under the pseudonym Erik Marks, and for the purposes of clarity, because your book's name that's your pseudonym for the book, we'll sort of use Erik as being your name for this, and that's the name that's on the podcast. But I just wanted to make sure that we address that, and I'm excited about your book and your story and your napkin. So welcome. I'm happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. About the name, I guess we should just explain that a little bit to the listeners. So yes, my name is Mark. Actually, it's Mark Erik Hecht. And throughout a lot of my life, people called me by my middle name, Erik. When it came to writing a book that told a story, which was based almost entirely on true events, I really wanted to protect the characters in the book because they are real people with real families and real histories. And I thought the best way to do that, since some people in my life knew who these people were, was to create a bit of a distance there. So for that reason, when I approached different publishers about the book, there was a suggestion about playing around with the name a little bit. So for some people, it's obvious who I am, but for people who have no clue who the author is, they won't make a connection to the real life story or the real life character.
That's
So
fantastic.
Erik is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's also fun about this is, you just pluraled your first name, so you're just channeling in, some sense of abundance in that. So I love all of this. So your napkin that came along with your book, which thank you for your book, and the book is Rescuing Ethan and Gabe: The Power of One Stable Committed Relationship. And I think that your napkin has something to do with that because it says systems don't change lives, people do, slowly, imperfectly, and at great personal cost. Why did you share that with me?
Well, it's it's something that I have been thinking about for a very long time because of my career choices. But I don't think I ever realized what it meant until it impacted me in a very different way. I mean, the reality is, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I worked most of my career inside either the international children's rights system or domestically in child protection systems. And I really believed in those systems. I believed in the legal system that I studied in law school, and I teach now part time as a professor at the University of Ottawa. And I still advocate for that system and suggest that it is better than any other alternative anyway. The child protection system or child international children's rights system, the domestic child protection system. There are also systems that work well in theory. But the more I worked inside those systems, the more I found problems. And the problems weren't really systemic in a way. The problems were more on the application of the system. Everything worked great on paper. Obviously, a lot of very smart minded people got into rooms when they drafted the Convention on the Rights of the Child or our Child and Youth and Family Services Act. But when it came to the application, there was something missing. There was a gap. And I kept struggling with what exactly is the gap. And only when it kind of impacted me on a very personal level did I realize the gap was the humans involved. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that you could look negatively upon it. In other words, you could say that people are not, people working within the systems are not motivated or not interested in positive outcomes. But it wasn't that. It was almost the opposite, which were the people who were successful in getting through the systems, particularly I think about the clients or the children who came out on the other end uh, in a more positive way, perhaps. And when it all started, they started with the system, ended up walking away better off, let's say, because of a person who did more, a person who not so much was more engaged in the system, but more engaged with the individual. It became personal. And when I kind of thought about that even further, it wasn't so much that the person had this connection with the youth or the child, but it's that they stayed. And to me, that was something that I never really thought about and I didn't really hear people talk about. But really, as the title of the book suggests, the power of one stable and committed relationship. They stayed through the good times and the bad times, and that was often enough to kind of repair whatever damage the system had created.
I think it's really amazing that, I think, isn't there, well, first of all, um, the work you chose to do is a gift. I mean, it is a part of, it is really, when we think about the landscape of the things that we do well as a society, as a people, I think we want to feel like and know that we are doing well by the next generation, that we are taking care of the voices and the people who, to this point, have not yet gained the capacity to take care of themselves in a world that can be very hard, arbitrary, and cruel to them, depending upon where they are fortunate or unfortunate enough to be born. So I think that standing up for and protecting children, both domestically and internationally, is very noble work. And I'm sure you would agree. I think looking at just the expression on your face, you feel passionately about that work. So thank you for taking up that mantle. I think it's important that good people involve themselves there. The other side of it that I think is really interesting is that you're also um, not disillusioned by the title or moniker or intent of the work enough to understand that just the institution is enough to make the difference. It often isn't, and in fact, it leaves many behind. Right? I think that's one of the things you're saying. Are you not?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that overall, the systems that we operate within Canada, whether it's, as I said, the child protection system or our legal systems, which are the two systems I work in, I think for the most part they work. They're in fact they're better than the alternatives. When I was doing my international work, I often was fortunate to travel around the world and see other systems that try to reach the same objectives and did so with less success. However, no system is perfect. And the reality is that within the systems that we operate here in Canada on those points, um, often will leave a group of people behind. And the reality is, in many instances, the people who are left behind are disproportionate to the rest of the population. So, for example, statistics we often talk about in child protection services is the Indigenous community, which only represents about 7% of the Canadian population, but represents over 50% of the amount of youth who are in foster care or group care. And in fact, one of the characters in my book is a young Indigenous child. And again, that person is based on somebody who I mentored in real life. Um,
So
so,
can I pause for a second because I think it's really
sure.
important that we stop here for a second because you said something off the top that I think is really important, and I think we get pretty caught up on the nuance of these things and the detail. But I want to make sure that you said this. You said the whole system within Canada is better than the alternative, and you talked about Canada because obviously this is a fun conversation because we were talking about where I went to university is where you are. Part-time professor. That your daughter and my son are both in the same faculty there right now, which is kind of fun. But beyond that sort of similarity, and we're both Canadian as a result, living in the same sort of similar place. This is not a Canadian only problem. This is not a systemic issue just in this country, isn't it? It internationally. And this is the thing that I think people miss. You said it very quickly. It is not people like one person falls off the table here and one person falls off the table there in the various systems. It is groups of people that are often left behind or overlooked in the structure of the way the system is built that by and large is better than the alternative. However, it still leaves room for groups to be left behind, correct?
Yes, and there's actually a lot of similarity within the groups. So if you kind of look at, again, systems across the world, at least let's say in democratic countries, countries which I guess would be more similar to North American countries. I'm thinking here of parts of Europe, parts of Africa, and Latin America, for example. Um, what you find is there's still a disproportionate amount of some groups of youth, of children who are in state care, whatever that might look like, or in the juvenile justice system. And it's usually the smaller percentage of the population. So in Canada, and and other like I was referring to similar countries in terms of perhaps a structure and politics. If we look at Australia, for example, is very similar, that the indigenous populations are a very small percentage of those who are still living in the country, but yet make up a large amount of youth who are in the state care or in the juvenile justice system. And again, you could look at some states in the US where the Black community is actually small by number. But if you look at the amount of Black children who are in foster care, group care, or in juvenile detention facilities, is disproportionate. So there is that trend that goes across pretty much every country that I've worked in. But similarly, my message is one that also resonates with almost every country. In fact, when I started doing a bit of a deep dive to see if this idea I had, that basically you just have one adult who sticks around, and that often is enough to change the outcome for the youth. When I started doing kind of academic research, because I'm an academic after all, I started finding journal articles and publications from all over the world where the research was showing the same thing, which is, and there's actually, I took one of the academic articles, perhaps one of the stronger ones that came out of a journal in the US, and it's actually inside my book. I think it's in the first or second page where I kind of reference it, that when people look, when academics and researchers were looking at what made children successful, and they looked at all the broken systems. So these are children growing up in poverty, children growing up in war, children growing up with parents who have addiction issues and mental health issues. The one commonality between all of these in all these countries was that the child, when they grew up and they were successful, and we could, talk about what success means, and they were successful, they always refer to the fact that they had one stable and committed relationship in their life. That's all it took. So it's universal.
I love this. And so I had this old, paper napkin that I every week I talk about a solo napkin, and one of my solo napkins was abundance starts with one. And I think this is a really interesting thing to riff on here a little bit, because what you're saying is that one of the things that the angle was partially, hey, when you're starting something, start something, just start it. And one turns to two and two turns to three. But you're talking about that very same thing from a different way around. And I meant it to be also the other way around, that you can make a difference, that one person makes a difference. One person can build something that is bigger. And I feel like you're saying the same thing, that, abundance starts with one person makes a difference. And it's really the only thing that ever has.
Yes. The only thing I would add to that is, I think, because certainly this isn't a new idea, I think a lot of organizations, a lot of agencies, I mean, you could think of, in North America anyway, Big Brothers is kind of based on this idea. Big Sisters, there's a lot of mentorship organizations out there. The difference is what I kind of learned, and I think what my book, and when I talk about it, what I kind of warn people about, is the other part of the paper napkin I gave you, which is not only that systems don't change lives, people do, but they do it slowly, imperfectly, and at great personal cost.
And I think this is the other part that's really
It is.
important. And I think this is why I think people gulp before they do this, because we're not great at this. We're going to make mistakes. It's going to be imperfect. And aren't we really, it's bilateral. We're really quick to judge people who help and help imperfectly, don't we? Like, this is something that systems do, and systems are really good at punishing people for helping imperfectly, for trying and failing. Isn't it true? Like, we see this happen all around the world, that somebody puts up their hand and says, yeah, I'll be the dope who's going to help out. And even look at the language I'm using inadvertently. I'll be the one who helps out, and watch the target just move to me immediately for trying.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very quick to judge, and we're very quick to judge failure.
Right.
So what ends up happening,
or imperfection in process.
Yeah.
Right.
Imperfection.
And just to use your language, failure is feedback. Imperfection, I love the way you're using this, because it's slowly and imperfectly. we're not experts at this. We're helping. We're trying.
That's right. And we can't uh assume that because we're not seeing the success that we would like to see as quickly as we like to see it, that we've done something wrong, that it's imperfect in some way. It's slow and it will be imperfect. And the other thing people need to realize, and I think we're very quick to kind of gloss over this, it comes at a great personal cost. And I think this is another kind of theme that happened in real life to me, and a theme that shows in the book, which is at the end of it, you may end up with a child, a youth who grows up to be in a better position than when you first met them for whatever reason. Okay. However, you coming out on the other side may be damaged. And I think we need to talk about that, and we need to recognize that the cost of you helping somebody out is not like in the movies or on TV where you both walk away better for it. Likely one person may walk away slightly better and one person may walk away slightly weaker. But overall, maybe that is something we should be supporting as a society.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you learned this lesson, because I think that's the powerful part of this. You're not you were very clear to talk about the fact that you did a lot of research, you did a lot of work on this. So Mark did a lot of research on this. Erik wrote a book about it, but the research that you did was diligent and thorough, but it was inspired by your experience. And I want to just read this out real quickly because I think it's important. Inspired by true events, this novel shares the story of two boys, one from a wealthy Jewish family in BC, British Columbia, and the other from a remote indigenous community in northern Manitoba, which is about as remote gets, northern Manitoba, which maybe have in some areas higher population of moose than people. Who have nothing in common except for one stable and committed relationship that impacted their lives, spanning 20 years. So this is your inspiration for this work and for this journey. Let's dive into that to the extent that you can share. What happened?
Yeah. So what had happened is one of the things that kind of motivated me to go to law school in the first place was an experience that I had working at a summer camp. So back when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I was very involved in the kind of the camping scene. I spent all my summers as a
The
child.
Canadian boy.
Yeah, as a child and then as an adult, working at various summer camps, frankly, across the country. The last few years before I kind of retired at the young age of 20 something from my camping life, I was the assistant director at a summer camp in Nova Scotia. And when I was at that camp,
For those of people who are listening, BC is on the Pacific coast of Canada, and Nova Scotia is on the Atlantic coast of Canada. So we're talking a great distance here.
yeah, and the camp was, Nova Scotia being a fairly small province, the camp would draw youth from other provinces around, all the way to Newfoundland, which our smallest little province, in the middle of the Atlantic, all the way, to bigger cities in Nova Scotia, like Halifax, for example, which is still a small city, but slightly bigger than some of the other small towns where the children came from. And there was one youth who I met that summer, who actually was from all the way from out west, and for a variety of reasons, his family had initially grown up in the East Coast. They decided to send him to this camp quite far away from their home, and the boy was there. He, at the time when I met him, I believe he was around 12 or 13. He didn't really know anybody else at the camp. He wasn't from that province or that part of the country. And he often got himself into some very difficult situations at the camp. He was a little bit of a character who liked to challenge authority and question people and sometimes irritate people. And as assistant director, his staff would often come to me and say, "We're having an issue with him. He's not listening. He's not kind of playing by the rules." And initially I was kind of the camp disciplinarian, kind of like the vice principal of a school. And that was my job to meet with kids, try to figure out what was going on if needed. in extreme situations to kind of discipline, although it's not really something I like to do as part of my job. But there were consequences for decisions they were making, and we made sure that the punishment would fit the crime and that kind of thing. But the fact is, I was meeting with this kid almost on a daily basis because of this, and we ended up just kind of connecting. And once camp was over, the summer was over, we both decided that we wanted to maintain that connection. So after camp ended, we remained in contact. I ended up going out west at one point during the year, and I was able to meet with him, and I met his family, and so they knew who I was, and they knew I was communicating with their child. So that's obviously important to make sure that the adults are around to keep the youth safe. And we just kind of formed this relationship, which became I would label it as a mentorship. And we maintained that for a very, very, very long time. Fast forward, I then go on to law school. I then choose to become a practicing lawyer working in our child protection system. And I'm now at that point married. I have my own children. I'm still in communication with the other youth, although now he's a young adult in his late 20s. And we still are in contact on occasion. And then what happened is it was a very unique set of circumstances. I'm the lawyer for the Child Protection Agency. So I'm not on the front lines. I don't meet with the families. I don't meet with the youth. My clients are the child protection workers and the social workers. It's rare that I would ever see a youth because the youth don't come to court. If we have to come to court, it would be the social worker who comes to court. So I'm one removed from the actual children that we're aiding through my work, and the families that we're assisting. But because, as I said, we seem to have in Ontario a disproportionate amount of Indigenous youth who are in the child welfare system. My agency and some other nearby agencies decided they were going to have a summer camp specifically for our Indigenous youth who were in care, and they would connect those youth, many of whom are living in group homes and foster homes, with white families, so it's not a cultural match. They would bring in members of their communities, elders, members of their band, to try to organize activities and teachings that the youth would be able to benefit from, hopefully. So they were organizing this camp, and I got a call from senior leadership at my agency saying, "We hear rumor that you're a camp guy." That you worked at camp your whole life. And I said, or young life. And I said, that's true, but that was a very, very long time ago. Why are you calling? And they said, well, we need a certain amount of male chaperones to be on the trip. And there's not a lot of males who work in the child welfare system. I mean, even at my office, I would say 80% of the staff are female. So they kind of went through the list of the males who'd be available to chaperone, and they couldn't find enough people, especially it was during the summer. Many people take their summer holidays. And they said, I know you're our lawyer and you're not a social worker, but you have a lot of camp experience. Would you be interested in going back to camp? And I think it took me probably less than 3 seconds to say, absolutely. When do I get the bus? I mean, this was just, reminiscent of all those great years I had at camp. So when I went on this trip, because we were dealing with a very different population than the summer camp I'd worked at 20, 30 years before then, most of the youth had a one-on-one chaperone. So for every youth, you had a staff who was assigned to them. And I was assigned to this.
These are obviously high needs.
High needs, lots of trauma. Lots of generational trauma, lots of personal trauma for sure. So I was assigned to this one boy who was 11 at the time, same age as my daughter, actually, at the time. And after a few weeks together, it was like all coming back to me. It was like, I've done this before. It was this connection that I had formed with this young boy who really just was in a similar situation in some ways, but entirely different in other ways to the first youth I mentored. And when the camp was over and he went back to his group home and I went back to my home in the suburbs of Ottawa, I couldn't stop thinking of the fact that, I can't just let this go. This can't just be a goodbye. Um, and I reached out to his worker and I said, is there anything that I can offer? And she said, well, we do a kind of mentorship program here, although it's unusual that one of our staff is a mentor. Usually we go into the community to find mentors. So we obviously had to go through some checks and balances, again, the system, because we had to ensure there was no conflict of interest. We had to ensure that all the proper policies and protocols were followed, etc. And then ultimately, I was permitted to become his mentor. And that mentorship continued on, and in fact, it still continues on. I'm in daily communication with this young man who's now 19 years old, and he's now kind of been repatriated. He's living back in his community. But what always kind of struck me is even though these two youth never met in real life, and this is where kind of the story goes from nonfiction to a bit of fiction, is I said, wouldn't it be interesting if these two youth who had nothing in common except me one day met? What would that look like? And that kind of was the impetus for putting pen to paper during COVID and seeing if I could turn this into a story. So there's a part of fiction for sure, but I would say 80% of the book is a reflection on real life. And then, as I said, while I was writing here, when the manuscript was done, kind of sitting on my desk, I thought, is this unique to me? Like, this, I can't be the only person that this has happened to, where they kind of are parachuted into the life of somebody with these outcomes. And that's when, you're right, I started putting my academic hat on and did a bit of a deep dive and realized, no, it is. But as I said, I was at the same time facing some personal cost to all of this. It was impacting on my mental health, on my physical health, carrying this around. And in particularly with the older youth, who was, as I said, now an adult, he was going through some real significant personal struggles, and he was relying on me more and more while I had this kind of new person in my life that I was trying to mentor. And so there was a personal cost to it, and that's the stuff that really I struggled to find literature on. It was either nothing was helping, the systems were being relied upon and failing a group of youth, or there are success stories out there. But what wasn't being uncovered was the success was slow, the success was imperfect, and the success came at personal cost. And that's when I kind of thought, I wouldn't even call it wisdom. What I like to say to myself is, this is a correction. That I've corrected what's kind of already been discussed out there about the value and the impact of one person on the life of another person.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is, so what made you? So you chose each of these young men, to mentor, and that's the word you use, and I think it's a great word for your relationship with them. And in both cases, they started at camp, so there was that one piece that was a common thread, and I think one of the things that speaks to is the structured decompression that happens in a camp-like environment, right? There is so much research, and you would have done this as well, I'm sure, that our bodies change and our neurology change, our physiology changes as we spend more than 4 hours with somebody else. And I mean a distraction-free 4 hours, away from these phones and other devices that are out there in the world that are keeping our attention away from each other. So in a distraction-free environment, spending prolonged periods of time can create the structured decompression where people actually really connect on a much deeper and much more meaningful level. People reveal who they really are in those settings. So that would obviously have been part of it, because you had the environment to create that connection with them. Is there anything else you can speak about that moment where you felt called to support these people? Because I think I've been lucky enough, and I have wonderful parents. I've had a wonderful I've had nothing but opportunities my whole life. And so my story is not the same. And yet I've had wonderful mentorship from incredible humans. And I remember speaking with one of my greatest mentors at one point. I asked him point blank, I said, when I look back to the person I was at the time that I met you, yeah, I'm unrecognizable to myself in some ways. And I have no idea why you would have agreed to work with me, why you would have helped me. And his answer was that he felt called. And that was his best answer. And he's a very deep and insightful man. And for him to have that as his answer and his entire answer, I thought was striking. So I'm going to ask you that question. What called you to help real Ethan and Gabe?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot I could say about that. First of all, where I would correct you is that I didn't choose them. We chose each other. I think that there was kind of a mutual connection that had been established. I absolutely agree with you about what you said about summer camp. And it's not only the fact that we're away from our screens and that we're living together, essentially in the same room, right? You're in a bunk together, you're in a cabin together. So you're living together with somebody for weeks at a time without those distractions, but also that you're outside. I mean, I find that's something, again, in the research that I did, uh, there's an actual very interesting body of research where therapists who are working with youth in crisis, okay, the traditional way they work with them is they have an office, the youth is brought to their office, they sit in the office talking for an hour, and off they go. Okay,
Under all the lights in a closed
absolutely.
room, blah, blah, blah.
The
Yeah.
therapists who actually leave their office and go for a walk around the corner with the youth end up having better results than those who sit in the office. The only difference
And
is they're
it's night
outside.
and day. That study is night and day, no pun intended. When you're outside, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
So
So
yes,
that's another factor. The other factor I think was with both these kids, something about their story or their personality kind of resonated with me, going back to probably my own childhood or my own youth. And again, similar to you, I think people would look at my life as a child, a young person, and say that I was very fortunate, which I was. But imperfect, like everything else. I had some challenges in my childhood and my adolescence within my own family. And there is an expression. It's not my expression. It's probably an overused expression that I'm sure you're familiar with, which is uh, as we grow up, we tend to become the people that we needed in our life when we were kids. And I think there was a little bit of that going on that I kind of, as I grew up and as I matured, I started realizing this is a kind of person that would have made a difference in my life. And then through um, certain circumstances that we just talked about at my summer camps, those circumstances allowed me to find myself in a situation where I could become the person I wish I had been when I was young. Or I had when I was younger. The other thing, and this is where I might get a little emotional, is both in both circumstances, the goodbye felt like it shouldn't have been a goodbye. And this is in my novel, and both of them are entirely parts of the novel which are 100%, which is going back to the 90s and early 2000s, where I met the first youth, the one who in the book is referred to as Ethan. The end of the summer, we said our goodbyes, and he went on the bus that was going to bring him back to the airport for him to fly back to his family out west. And literally, he was on the bus, and his bags were packed, and all the kids were on the bus waiting to go. And I was running around trying to make sure that nobody was left behind, and all the kids and all their stuff was accounted for. And I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and Ethan had gotten off the bus, and he gave me a hug, which is pretty unusual for a 13, 14-year-old boy. And he whispered in my ear, I'll see you again. And then you fast forward.
Wow.
I'm now in this
So
situation
so
where
you said nothing, but by the way, you'd said goodbye, you got up on the bus, you turned as if to, you know, I leaving on a jet plane's in my mind. I packed my bags, I'm ready to go.
yeah,
Right? And so you're ready to leave, and I got goosebumps that he comes down, and there he is, and says, "I'll see you again."
yeah. And then you fast forward. And at the end of the camping trip with the youth who we refer to as Gabe in the book, again, similar situation. It was a long bus ride. He hadn't slept very much on the camping trip. So he was fast asleep. I was getting off before him on my stop. And I kind of nudged him awake and said, goodbye. It's been really cool hanging out with you. You're a really cool kid, kind of good luck kind of thing. And then I left. And then I was walking towards my car, which was in the parking lot where the bus dropped me. And it was pouring, pouring, pouring rain, which was interesting because it hadn't rained the whole camp, but it was suddenly pouring, raining on the goodbye. And I hear someone calling my name. I'm in my car. Or about to get in my car, packing my stuff in my trunk. And I hear someone calling my name. And there's Gabe. He's running on the wet pavement. Wasn't even wearing shoes. I think he was barefoot running on the, and he threw his arms around me. And he was a little kid back then. So his arms were kind of barely around my waist. And he was crying. And he said, "Am I ever going to see you again?" And I said, "Well, I really hope so." And I said, "I'm really going to try." And then he says something like, "Okay, but you're not one of those adults that say they're going to try, but then don't really try." And I say, no, I'm one of those adults. If I say I'm going to try, I'm going to try. And so, like I said, it was almost as if we kind of chose each other. It's not like, and interestingly enough, Abe did ask me, years later, why did you choose me? Did you, when you were looking for someone to mentor, did they give you like a catalog and you read my profile and you thought this is someone who I can mentor? And I said, I didn't choose you. We chose each other.
So I'm gonna push back. You said that now a couple times, Eric, and I'm gonna push back because I think that's a great deal of humility and grace that you're giving to the situation. And I believe that especially with the work that you will have done, that you would be aware that even in what Gabe said to you as he ran across that pavement in bare feet, you're not one of those one of those adults who say they're going to do that and don't do that. I think I think the person who wants help is always open to help. It just doesn't look like it because most of the time people don't stick along the slow, imperfect personal cost to give the help and see it all the way through. So their protection is not looking like they're looking for it all the time, but they really are. And so as generous and as humble a comment as it is that you heard a call that other people didn't hear loudly enough to drown out the slow, imperfect cost that it was going to be. And I think I mean, that's something to be recognized here. That's something that's unique about your story. And I think that if we spend a little bit of time in understanding this calling, I think we might help some people out there that are saying, well, where do I go? How do I help? How do I even get to the place where I can do that? And I don't know that I'm ready for the slow, imperfect, great personal cost. And I'm gonna say, if you knew how hard it was going to be all the way through at the beginning, would you still have done it? Maybe, maybe not. And I also still wonder, something you sort of tipped your hat about in both cases. I'm so blessed. I have the best parents. And yeah, of course I had my stuff growing up. We all do. And I think that we walk around, we see the world as we are and not as it is. And every now and then we hit this homing beacon that's awfully similar to our homing beacon. And we feel called for some reason because the person that we've become can help somebody else who's walking a path that's like sort of near our path. And we feel like we can grab them along the way. And I was wondering what happened for you. I mean, yes, there was the physical connection. Yes, there was the structural decompression. Yes, there was the outside camping. Yes, there were all those. The conditions are ripe for that, no question. But you still quieted your personal fears and your personal self-preservation as a husband, a father, a dad, like you've got as a employee of the company in the second case, right? All these things are going on, and you were quiet. You were able to quiet those things down and hear the call. And I just want to. I think it's really important that we understand that there is a calling, and we need to be able to hear it because it's there almost way more often than we want to recognize it.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think there's lots of opportunities out there for everybody in their everyday life. And I think this is something else I kind of learned throughout this process is you're absolutely right. People who often, and I don't want to generalize all people. My experience has really been with young people and adolescents. I think adults function on a kind of different level. But definitely with young people, with youth, children and youth, is they're often not asking for help. And it's the ones who don't ask for help who you should pay attention to. I often tell people when I talk about this that if you're looking for somebody who you think may need or would benefit from your support, whatever that might look like, um, look around and find the person who's invisible in the room. The person who's invisible in the room is probably the person who would benefit from a conversation with you. Not the loud person, not the talkative person. The person who's able to advocate for themselves are likely already in a situation where they know who to go to for help and what kind of help they may need. Okay, again, this doesn't always work. It's just a generalization. But the young person who sits in the back of the room quietly is often the person who's silently saying, I could really use some support right now. And like you said, in both those cases, neither Ethan or Gabe came to me saying, I'm struggling right now. I think you may be able to help. Can you help? They didn't. It was more that I recognized what they weren't saying. And that was kind of the trigger for me to think maybe there's more I can offer this person.
Mm-hmm. How much was it with Gabe, who was the second one? How much of that had to do with the fact that he was the same age as your daughter, and sort of was there some degree of parity that was more obvious with Gabe than there was necessarily with Ethan at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think back on the nature of those connections, they were definitely different. I mean, with Ethan, he would have been around 13, maybe 14 during that camp. I was, like I said, maybe 19, 20. So it was a very much a big brother type of thing. And I think he saw me, and that's how our friendship kind of matured is in many ways he would call me and he would tell me things going on in his life the same way. I mean, I had sisters growing up and I have two daughters, so I don't actually have a son or a big brother myself, but I would imagine that it would have been that kind of a connection. By the time Gabe came around, that was definitely more of a father figure, I think. And I think Gabe would even probably admit that. And I do think that as I was spending time with him on the camp and my daughter being back home with her mom, the same age, it was almost natural that I was going to use some of the parenting that I had for my daughter with Gabe, things like how I spoke to him about everything from sports to what's going on in his own life with his family, or um, he liked on the camping trip when I would read him bedtime stories before he went to sleep, very similar to what I was doing with my daughter at the time. So I think there was a little bit of that. That was the connection too, is in both instances, I think it was partly circumstantial, partly environmental. And as I said, partly me thinking back on my own life, what would I have needed in this situation, and trying to offer that to somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. How did it impact? How did these relationships with Ethan and Gabe impact the relationship with your own family?
Well, I think with Ethan, I had met him before I was married, before I had my own children. I did bring some of that into my own family in terms of everyone knew who he was and everyone knew about our story. Unfortunately, there was a period of time when, as I alluded to, where he was really struggling with his own mental health and some addiction issues. And at that point, it was kind of like, I think I have to perhaps create a bit of a distance here because I don't know if I want to welcome that into my home. I was kind of still there for Ethan, trying to help him as much as I could through that with his own family, who was also trying to help him get through those things. So I did have to create a bit of a distance there for a while. With Gabe, he sure he was parachuted into my life when I was married and had children, had a full-time job and a career and that kind of thing. Um, and there were many times, I mean, Gabe, for a period of time, actually came to live with my family. And again, this is outlined in the book, and this is certainly more nonfiction than fiction in the book. And I think we were naive, which again, going back to my wisdom, look, you don't learn this without wishing you understood it sooner. Right. So, I mean, I, at the time, I think we were all a little bit naive that, well, we could do this. We could have this 11-year-old who's from a different culture, from a different community, from a different part of the province, come live with us. How difficult could it be? And then we started seeing how challenging this kind of role is. And it was having an impact on my family. And sometimes it was a very positive impact. Wow, this was really fun. Look, we taught Gabe something new he didn't know before. He's feeling safe. His sleep is better now. His eating is better now because he feels that he's in a safe environment. But there were definitely some challenges as well. Challenges in terms of him being able to get to school, challenges with his health, challenges with how he got along with my own children. And again, similarly, I use this opportunity to kind of put my academic hat on and do a bit of research on it. And this is something else. I think if, people listening to this podcast are thinking, well, this is, something I would really like to do. You do make sure, again, you come into this with open eyes. When I started looking at why foster parents, and although we were not officially foster parents, that's the kind of role we ended up taking with Gabe at one point in our story. Um, when you look at why foster parents stop fostering, statistically or in research, academic research, it's not because of an issue with the foster child. It's because of issues coming up with their biological child.
Right. Yeah, I've
And
heard that before.
yeah, and I think people are sometimes quite surprised by that. And only when I started seeing the impact having this other boy have in our home to my children who at the time were like, great, let's do this. This sounds like a great idea. But again, you have to stick with it. It's slow, it's imperfect, and there will be a cost to everybody. And I was explaining this to my daughter who was young at the time. I said, this is hard, but it's meant to be hard. Because when you do something which essentially is something like, a sacrifice of your lifestyle, a sacrifice of your comfort level, whatever, if you're sacrificing something, it's meant to be hard. We could understand that as adults, explain that to an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
So that was a
yeah.
challenge right there.
Can I, one of the things I really admire, I think a lot of people would hear about your story and the mentorship that you've given to these two young people as they've grown into young men, and would throw flowers in your direction and praise. And I'm sure you've heard all of those things. And it would be easy to come at it with a great deal of wisdom and advice and see, hey, you want to be great like me? Look what I've done for these two boys. You can do that too. And here's how to do it. Here's a recipe book. What you did was something very different. And you gave this sort of vulnerable story. And this was a piece in your submission that to me that, so we don't do conversations about fostering children and stuff like that on Paper Napkin Wisdom. We're talking about leadership. And what really struck me about your leadership story because it is a leadership story, and it's the only leadership story that matters. It's the one-on-one leadership story, and I think what a lot of leaders lose track of is that leadership is one-on-one, and it is the weekly one-on-one. It's not the monthly one-on-one. That's something else. That's you reporting to me. The weekly one-on-one where you really show that you care, and you said this about your paper napkin in your submission. I thought this was really unique and different. You admitted that this wisdom didn't arrive cleanly. Your quote was that it came through regret, moral injury, professional boundaries crossed and upheld, and the slow realization that impact is rarely visible when it matters most. That's heartbreaking. Like that vulnerability that you share this with, and for people who are just listening to this conversation and not seeing Erik's face, there's a lot of emotion that's going through this all the way through. This has been a very vulnerable conversation, and I hope for those of you who watch the video, take something away from this. You're talking about the fact that you help two people in their lives, but it came through regret, moral injury, professional boundaries crossed and upheld. Those are not small things. Any one of those things would be enough to stop people dead in their tracks. But you kept going.
Yeah, I kept going. I think because and trust me, there were times when I'm like, I think I've gone as far as I could with this. But I just
so there were times when you wanted to quit. There were times when you were like, this is not for me. I got to stop. I got to stop this.
There were times in both instances when either I realized it myself or people who I loved and trusted looked at me and said, Erik, you got to stop this. And I struggled with that a little bit. But at the end of the day, I thought to myself, this is exactly what everybody else had done in their lives. It's exactly what everybody else. They said, I'm here for you until it gets uncomfortable. And then I'm out. And in some cases, it may be biological parents. In some cases, it may have been a worker, a social worker. It could have been their therapist, could have been a foster parent, could have been the teacher. But they stuck to it until it got hard. And then they were said, I'm out. And I just kept going back thinking to myself, I don't want to be one of those people. What's going to get these kids through to the other side is the power of one stable and committed relationship. And that doesn't mean you're stable and committed until you can't be anymore. It means you're stable and committed till the end. And we do this naturally. I mean, the majority of our population, this is called parenting, right? The majority of our population, and I could speak about this because I see the other side in my work when parents are struggling, but the majority of our population parent their children very, very well, certainly to the best of their abilities, right? And when you become a parent, whether it's naturally because you have a baby or because you choose through adoption, or you just have assumed the role of a parent because perhaps your child died and now you're left with a grandchild that you're raising, which often happens as well. Yeah, is that you don't parent until it gets hard. You parent through the hard. And when you look at the children who have come out on the other side successful, and I use successful kind of in quotations because what's successful to mean you may not be successful for everyone. But let's put it this way. When the child grows up to become the best version of themselves, whatever that looks like, it's because as a parent, we stuck through it. We stuck through the hard times, right? And so we do this kind of naturally with our own children. But there's a lot of youth out there who don't have that ability. And there's a lot of adults out there who may not have children for a variety of reasons. So if you find that connection between somebody who understands that you have to kind of stick it out through the end and a youth who benefits from that, that's where the connection happens. And I was fortunate enough in my life that it's happened twice.
I say this often when I'm asked to speak and people ask me to speak about leadership, I'll say, well, leaders like parent in the sense that when you accept the responsibility to be a parent, there's not a day off from it. It's not like I'm not going to be a parent on Sundays, or after 20 years my term is done. I've reached my term limit, and I've termed out on my arrangement with you. It is a job that is taken and then taken for life. And it's not something that we can do lightly. And it's the same thing with leader. And it's the same thing, I believe, with mentor, and the way that you've applied it here, that you took it on. There wasn't a day off. There was, it meant something. And it meant that there were going to be good days and bad days for sure. And it meant that it was a role that you were going to keep. And I think that's it's a really powerful learning, I think, for anybody who's listening, because these are things that you can take on. They are things that you can make a difference on, but you have to understand. We all have to understand that it's slow, imperfect, and comes at great personal cost. And good intentions without the willingness to pay those costs don't generate any kind of result for yourself or anyone else, right? And I think that's a really powerful piece of your story. Would you not agree, Erik?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with all that you just said. Recognizing what you're doing and then recognizing what you're doing it for. So it's going into it with open eyes, realizing that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of patience and struggles for both parties involved in this kind of dynamic. But you're doing it because you're hoping for a goal that will be achieved at the end, which is both of you walk away different. One of you may walk away, like I said, a little bit with a little bit of scars, but the other person may walk away with some of their scars healed, if we want to use that analogy. And but I do think both of you walk away as better people because of it.
I want to shift it just a little bit, because some people are going to say, okay, then this is not for me. I'm not in the place to do that. I'm not in the season to do that. This is not right for me now. And if that's the case, somewhere in your orbit, there is likely someone who is helping someone who is being the mentor, someone who is enduring this personal cost, someone who is doing it slowly and imperfectly, and could use your encouragement in that way. And that's not being the mentor, it's supporting the supporter. And that person, you needed that support too, as you were going through that. Did you not?
And there's another system. You're absolutely right. You need a personal network around you, which is kind of like another system around you to help you get through that. So you're absolutely right. Maybe, and I did have those people. I had my own family. I had my own children, especially as they have now grown up and kind of seen the benefits of what we were doing as a family and what I was doing individually. And I had professional colleagues who I called upon. I had some friends of mine who were actually therapists who I called upon for coffee to say, what's going on here? Do you think this is something that I should continue? How should I continue it? And what kind of supports do I need to ensure it's successful? So yes, that's another kind of level there. There's another system that another network that would support the supporter. And that is also something that we need very often. It's something that we have kind of in our natural lives, right? As many of us are fortunate that when we're struggling parenting our child, we call our parent and we say, how did you do this? How did you get by this? Right. So it's the same kind of thing. But you may not be able to find those natural connections like your parents. But you could find somebody, hopefully, who would be able to provide you with that. But I do want to go back to what you said, actually, because this is a leadership issue, right? And I know that's certainly one of the themes of this kind of session of your podcast is looking at this through the leadership lens. And I do think it's very true, because it's the same with members of your team, whether you're coaching or employees, if you're managing a group. It's kind of realizing that you're going to have to give some of yourself up, that it's a slow process to reach whatever that collective goal is, that it won't be perfect. It's not going to be smooth. And there will be a personal cost to it. You will have to become vulnerable with your own team. You will have to be willing to acknowledge that you make mistakes to your own team. But if you stick it through, the one stable kind of committed relationship. It won't look the same in an employment situation, perhaps, as it will in your personal life, but the end goal will still be there. And the research still says the same thing. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this research on your own, that if the manager, if the leader sticks it through the good times and the bad times and kind of leads with that idea that they are doing this slowly, there's going to be mistakes, and there will be some personal costs associated with it. When they get through to the other side, just the kind of sticking around and the shared objective of being better at the other end of it often makes leaders very, very strong.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we talk a lot about in leadership, that it's important for leaders to have a support system and coaching and around them. And if you're a leader without a coach and support system, then you're likely a leader that is no longer leading effectively in your environment anymore. And it's a beautiful mirror. We all need that support. I know that we could go for a while because this conversation I feel like it's even picking up another layer as we go. I'm very grateful that you joined me here today. And this is the time of the show where I evoke a great story from a great man that supported us in the early days. His name was John Rulin. He gave us a napkin that said, "What you appreciate appreciates." That when you appreciate someone, they appreciate and value for themselves, for the world, and for you and in your relationship and dynamic with them. And that started him on a journey and mission of gratitude that he spread all around the world. He suddenly passed away about a year and a half ago. And ever since, we've been asking every guest to spread some appreciation, some gratitude out in the world by shouting out someone who has been helpful or supportive to them. Who would you like to shout out today?
It would have to be the person who the character Ethan is based on. So again, like we talked about at the beginning, we want to protect people's privacy, but there is part of the book where the character of Ethan develops into a very different person than the real life story. And that was partly because in speaking with Ethan's family, they had requested to change the ending of his personal story, and I did. But when I think back on those camp days that I spent with Ethan, I don't think either of us, well, I definitely know either of us knew it at the time, but what he taught me, what it taught me, was what it really means to stay present for another person. And that is something that I've carried with me since the day I met Ethan.
What a gift. Erik Marks, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
As we wrap up this conversation, you might find yourself sitting with a few thoughts that weren't there before. Maybe it's a face that came to mind. Maybe it's a moment that you hadn't thought about in a while. Or even a quiet question about where you've stayed and where you may have stepped away. Because what Erik shared today isn't something to understand alone. It's something to feel. That systems don't change lives, people do. And they do it slowly, imperfectly, and often at a cost that doesn't show up on any scoreboard. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to notice where that shows up in your own life. So as you move forward from here, consider this. Who's the one person in your world that might benefit from you staying just a little bit longer? Not fixing, not solving, just staying. And what might shift if you allowed yourself to show up even imperfectly? Because as we've heard today, it's not about getting it right. It's about not leaving. I want to thank Erik Marks for showing up today and for his honesty, his vulnerability, and for sharing a story that reminds us what leadership really looks like, one relationship at a time. And I want to thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for doing the work that often goes unseen. If this conversation and episode resonated with you, I'd invite you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I'd love to hear from you. What's one relationship in your life that brought this into focus? Take a moment and write it down, maybe even on a paper napkin, and share it with us with a hashtag paper napkin wisdom. But most importantly, share it with the other person that was involved in that relationship, because sometimes the smallest commitments create the biggest change. Until next time, remember, the wisdom you carry might be exactly what someone else is waiting for. Make it a great day.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.